Domitian's war with the Dacians ended in peace in 89. The emperor was satisfied with a formal expression of submission from the Dacian king Decebalus and celebrated a triumph in honor of the victorious end of the military campaign. Peace with the Dacians allowed Domitian to secure the borders of the empire on the lower Danube and move the army to another theater of war. We can only guess how long the peace on the Dacian border would have lasted if Domitian had not been killed in 96 by conspirators. The new emperor Trajan did not continue the policy of his predecessor and began to prepare for the final solution of the Dacian question. Trajan's first step in public life was to serve under his father's command in Syria. He first became praetor and then legate of the 7th Dual Legion, standing in Tarraconian Spain. By order of Domitian he led his legion into Upper Germany, whose governor, Antony Saturninus, declared himself emperor. The rebellion was crushed before his arrival, but Trajan managed to take part in a campaign against the Germans on the Rhine and Danube. As a reward for his successes, he received the consulship and then the governorship, first in the province of Lower Moesia or Pannonia, and then in Upper Germany. Here he first received news of his adoption by the Emperor Nerva, and then, after Nerva's death, of his succession to supreme power in the empire. Trajan was not in too much of a hurry to leave for Rome. Almost a year and a half he spent in Germany, where he was engaged in the reorganization of the frontier. Here Trajan's policy was focused on armed deterrence and maintaining peace with the Germans. On the contrary, the situation on the lower Danube inspired him with serious concerns. Before leaving for Rome, he undertook an inspection trip to Pannonia and Moesia, the results of which decided to start a war against the Dacians. On Roman coins, printed in anticipation of the war, depicted Mars the Avenger, which was to represent the forthcoming campaign of revenge against the enemy, who during the past 50 years several times invaded Roman territory, was responsible for the deaths of 2 commanders and a large number of ordinary soldiers. The peace made with the Dacians, after the death of Domitian, began to be perceived by his successor as disadvantageous and even dishonorable for Rome. The dependence of the Dacians, established by the terms of the treaty, was not too great, and their military aid during the subsequent conflicts with the Marcomanni and Sarmatians was insignificant. Money subsidy, which was obliged to pay him Rome, as well as the help of Roman military specialists Decebal used to build up their own forces. It should be taken into account, however, that these statements were partly the result of a course of conscious discrediting the foreign policy of his predecessor, which was carried out by Trajan. They were also caused by fear of the growing power of the Dacians. The main base for the attack of the strike group became Upper Moesia. 12 legions from various provinces were drawn to its capital, even from as far away as Britain. In addition to the legions, the war involved a large corps of auxiliary troops, no less than 19 cavalry 63 auxiliary and mixed cohorts, as well as contingents provided by dependent rulers and allies of Rome. Moorish cavalry under the command of their leader Lucius Quietus, Eastern archers, and detachments of Germanic allies arrived. The total number of assembled troops exceeded 100,000 men. First Dacian War. Trajan left Rome on March 25, 101. It is assumed that at first he arrived in Ancona, from there by sea crossed to Dalmatia and then continued his journey along the Morava River to Viminatium. With his arrival, the army crossed the Danube in 2 columns on pre-constructed pontoon bridges. The western column, crossing at Lederata, was commanded by Trajan himself. Eastern, under the command of the governor of Lower Messia Manius Liberius Maximus, crossed at Dierna. In the area of Tibisca, Karansabash, both columns of the Roman army successfully joined. Then they followed the valley of the river Bistra in the direction of Tap, where the main forces of Decebalus were located. As during the previous campaign, here was a decisive battle. Romans again won the victory, but the price was great. Decebalus managed to retreat with the remnants of his forces in the mountains of Orostia. Leaving Liberius Maximus with half of the army to besiege the fortress of Tapi, Trajan himself rushed in pursuit of the retreating. His goal was the capital of the Dacians Sarmizegetusa, but the winter, which began early in the year, made it impossible to continue the campaign. Trajan returned behind the Danube to winter, leaving 4 legions in the captured part of the country and intending to continue the campaign the following spring. Meanwhile, Decebalus had organized a second front against the Romans. His allies the Roxolans and Aorses, led by their kings Susig and Inismius, as well as the Dacians, Bastarni and Getae, crossed the frozen Danube. They swept away the barrier put up against them by Liberius Maximus and broke into the territory of Lower Moesia. Trajan had to send him in support of additional forces, first of all cavalry units from the composition of his army. Part of the army was transferred on the ships of the Danube flotilla. Thanks to the timely approach, help barbarian detachments were blocked from both sides and defeated in a number of bloody battles. The largest of them took place near the modern Romanian city of Adamoclisi. Its scale is evidenced by the mere number of Roman losses, which amounted to almost 4,000 people. In connection with this battle, for the first and last time on the scenes of Trajan's column telling about the battle, Roman wounded are depicted. Perhaps it is to this event refers to the episode mentioned by Cassius Dion, when for bandaging the wounded Trajan ordered to tear his own clothes into bandages. In the spring of 102, the war in Dacia resumed. The Romans moved again to Sarmizegetusa, advancing in 2 columns. One part of them, under the command of Trajan himself, relying on previously established bases, advanced from the west through Tapi. The other, under the command of Liberius Maximus, from the south along the valley of the river Olt and the pass Turnu Roșu went to Apple. As the reliefs of Trajan's column attest, on the way the soldiers continued to pave roads, build bridges and towers. Decebalus sent his ambassadors to the Roman camp, offering to negotiate, but a summit meeting never took place. Column reliefs show the Romans storming some fortress, must have been Apollis. Numerous trophies were taken during the offensive. In one of the mountain fortresses were found weapons and a banner captured by the Dacians when they defeated the army of Cornelius Fusca in 86. Liberius Maximus succeeded in capturing the sister of King Decebalus. Somewhere between Apollis and Sarmizegetusa another great battle took place, again ending in a Roman victory. Having lost hope of victory and fearing for his capital, Decebalus finally requested peace. His ambassadors arrived at the Roman military camp near Sarmizegetusa. The king was ordered to hand over weapons, defectors and prisoners, to tear down fortifications, to pay a huge contribution and to swear allegiance to Rome. All the conditions, in spite of their severity, were accepted. Decebalus's envoys were sent to Rome to appear before the Senate. Trajan returned to Rome, where he celebrated his triumph and received the solemn title, Dacian, from the Senate. Immediately after the end of the First Dacian War, Roman troops began fortifying camps and strongholds around Dacia and building communications in the border area on the lower Danube. Despite the defeat and surrender, Decebalus did not consider himself finally defeated. When surrendering his arms, he managed to conceal a significant portion of them, and continued to receive Roman defectors. The clause of the treaty that provided for the demolition of fortifications at all was ignored by him. In addition, the king sought to negotiate with Rome's opponents. In particular, in the capital of the province of Bithynia was identified Calidromus, a former slave of Liberius Maximus, who was captured by the Sarmatians and presented to Decebalus. The latter sent Calidromus to the Parthian king Pacorus II to induce the Parthians to attack Roman limits. On the way back he managed to escape, and so he ended up in his native Nicomedia, where he was exposed and sent under escort to Trajan. Finally, the cup of patience of the emperor was overflowing in the winter of 104 years, when Decebal attacked living along the Tissa-Sarmatian Yazigov. Unlike their relatives the Roxolans, the Yazygs had been Roman allies during the previous war. Decebalus took revenge for their support of Rome and took away part of their territory, thus directly violating the terms of the peace treaty. In light of these events, the Senate declared war on him in early 105. Second Dacian War. Decebalus attempted to take the initiative by launching a preemptive strike against the Roman garrisons left on the left bank of the Danube. The Romans were on standby and managed to repel all attacks. The attack on the bridge was also unsuccessful. Trajan left the capital to the theater of war. By this time, the army standing on the border with Dacia had increased to 16 legions. With Trajan's arrival, the legions crossed the Danube on the bridge at Drobeta and moved northward in several columns. Their goal was again the capital of the Dacians Sarmizegetusa, which, contrary to the treaty, Decebalus hastened to strengthen. The details of the war have not been fully elucidated, because its account in the sources, as well as the scenes depicted on Trajan's column, represent an incomplete and unreliable reflection of events. The war seems to have taken an extremely violent form, involving the killing of prisoners on both sides and the destruction of Dacian dwellings. Decebalus captured a high-ranking military man, Pompeius Longinus, consul suffactor, governor of Upper Moesia and Pannonia. After the end of the First War with the Dacians, he commanded Roman forces on the left bank of the Danube. Decebalus promised to return the prisoner if Trajan would withdraw his troops beyond the Danube. While the emperor pondered the answer, Pompey Longinus took poison, which he obtained through a loyal freedman. He sent the freedman himself with a letter to Trajan. Upon discovering what had happened, Decebalus offered to surrender Longinus' body in exchange for the freedman's return, but Trajan refused, considering preserving his life more important than burying the dead. Sarmizegetusa was surrounded and fell after a fierce assault. The Dacian chiefs chose to commit suicide to avoid falling into enemy hands. They took roundly a goblet of poison. The golden treasury of Decebalus fell into the hands of the Romans. The money was hidden at the bottom of a cave dug in the bed of the Sargisha River flowing near the capital. The prisoners who performed this work were all killed, but the secret was given out by one of the king's cronies. Decebalus himself fled from the capital and retreated with few associates to the mountains in the east of the country. Here he continued his resistance until he died in 106. The retinue that accompanied him was massacred by Roman horsemen. Seeing no salvation, Decebal pierced himself with a sword. The outcome of the war, as a result of the Roman conquest, Dacia was devastated. Cities and fortresses lay in ruins. The wealth of the country was plundered, cattle were slaughtered, and fields were burned. A large part of the country's population perished, and thousands of survivors were forced to leave their homeland. About 500,000 Dacians were captured and sold into slavery. To repopulate the newly conquered lands, Trajan had to resettle many colonists from among the Romanized population of the Balkan and Eastern provinces. A large part of the new population was made up of army veterans and their families. During the war, a huge booty was captured. It was reported to be 5 million pounds of gold and 10 million pounds of silver. In value terms, this was equivalent to the imperial revenues for 30 years. About 50 million sestertii Trajan donated to the Temple of Jupiter Capitoline. In addition, each Roman citizen received from him as a gift of 2,000 sestertii. At the expense of Dacian riches, the emperor was able to completely settle financial problems and make generous distributions to soldiers in anticipation of new campaigns against Parthia.